recording. It says recording pending. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, it
There
says someone started recording. Yeah.
we go. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Today we get to walk through the very exciting world of workflow together, AP workflow. And just so you have an idea of what all we're going to cover, I know there's a variety of different types of users on the phone here. We have submitters, approvers, admins, all sorts of different types of people. And I'm going to be touching on each of those different roles. So we'll look first at the very beginning at some more of the administrative pieces of like the setup, just so that way you have an understanding of where the information is coming from and how it all pieces together. And then once we review that, we'll jump into AP Manager and actually look at the workflow process. And I have a training database that I'll use so that way you can see how that looks from all the different types of roles. And then at the end, well, that piece will probably take roughly an hour or so. So then the second half of the training, I was going to turn it over to you guys because I know you've been working in workflow, trying to set it up and all of that. So if you have any specific questions or scenarios that you want to walk through together, then we can use that time for that. So along the way, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to stop me. I don't mind at all. You can ask along the way. And as we mentioned before, I am recording this. So later today, I'll be sure to send this recording out to each of you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So workflow from a high level perspective, just to give you a little idea of what it's intended for. The AP workflow process is meant for every month when you go in and you want to pay your invoices out of AMT. First, you can send them to approvers for them to review, just to make sure that all your information is accurate, the amounts are correct, you're sending it to the right people, confirming that everything is as intended. And then once they approve those invoices, then you can send them out for payment. So the workflow process does slow things down a little bit, but it keeps you from sending out, incorrect invoices or from paying the wrong people by accident. So with workflow, with AP workflow, as you've seen, there's a lot of different moving parts here as far as how it works, who's involved, and all of that. So the first thing I want to look at is from the administrative perspective of how you actually turn workflow on and some of the settings you configure there. So the first place I'm going to go is to my account and client profile. And most of you probably do not have access to this screen. This is something your administrators would see. But here within the client profile, if I scroll down about halfway, here's where they're turning on workflow for your entire database. So the first thing that they did here was choose an AP invoice grouping, which yours is property group 1, which I believe is equivalent to property manager. And so what that means by them choosing that here is that's determining how your workflows are going to be segmented. So for each one of your property groups or for each one of your property managers, you're going to have a different workflow. So let me go to Portfolio Insight, Data Customization, and Groupings Management. And just to show you, I'm selecting Property Group 1, which is Property Manager. And then if you look down below at the group values, here's all the property managers that you have in your system. So since this grouping here is the one that you've designated as your workflow grouping, well, hold on, let me just, okay, making sure I was looking at the AP one, not contract. So what that means is for each one of these property managers that you're seeing, they essentially have their own workflow configuration, which means, Joe and Mary might be approving the invoices associated to Alfred, but a different set of people may be approving the invoices associated to Alan. But really, it just means that each of these property managers has their own workflow configuration, so that invoices associated to their leases are going to go through a different workflow each month. And we'll look more at the setups in just a bit. But your administrator here chose property group 1 and then checked this box to turn on workflow. And that does turn it on for your entire database. So all your invoices associated to all charges on all leases, they now are going to have to go through this workflow process before you can pay them out of AMT. So you can't just turn workflow on for a certain group or for a couple invoices here and a couple there. Once you turn it on, it is for the entire database. I see someone has raised their hand. Is there a question?
Hi, Christina. Sorry, this is Kathy. I have plenty.
Okay.
You briefly showed the area where the property managers are assigned to the workflow, right? My question is, if a store was assigned to me, but then I needed someone else to work on it, can I easily assign it to somebody else, like a particular invoice?
In this scenario, are you the approver?
Um,
Or
yes.
you're the person reviewing the invoice for accuracy and then either approving or rejecting it?
Right, but I'd like to have somebody else do it.
Okay. That is possible. Once we get to the setup or the configuration screen of how to set up your workflows, I'll circle back to that because I think it'll make more sense when I can show you the screen and
Sounds
how
good.
it would look.
Thank
But
you.
yes, that is possible.
Thank you.
So once I go to this workflow administration screen here, if I leave there and I haven't answered your question, just remind me of that.
Will do. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so as I mentioned, checking this box here turns on workflow for all of your invoices within AMT. So if the day comes and you guys decide you no longer want to use that, you can uncheck this box to turn it off. However, you have to make sure that all of your invoices are clear of that workflow process before doing so. Otherwise, it'll give you an error and tell you there's currently invoices pending and you can't turn it off. But this box here is how you would do that should the day ever come. All right, so that's turning on workflow. The next thing I want to look at is insecurity. Again, this is another administrative thing, but if I go to my account and security, we're really establishing two different pieces here. We need to establish the system class for our users, and then also we need to establish who the approvers are going to be in the workflow. So first thing I'm going to do is look at this system class tab here on the right. And whether you know it or not, each one of you has your own system class assigned to you. And what that means is that's the settings that control what screens you're able to see in AMT, what kind of functionality you can do. It's just your overall security settings. That's what the system class is. So the reason I'm showing you this is because once you turn workflow on for your database, each of you who's going to be involved in that workflow process, you need access to those pieces of the system. So whether, well, for whichever system class you're assigned to, you can select it here on the left, or your administrator will. And then on the right-hand side in the Manage Permissions, if we look under My Account, and down at the very bottom, you'll find Workflow-AP Invoice. And then underneath that, you'll have two little nodes, Invoice Submittal and Workflow Administration. So these three right here are going to be your three workflow pieces that users will need access to. And each type of user will have a different kind of access. So when thinking about the different kinds of users that might be involved in your workflow process, you're typically going to have three different kinds. You'll have your submitters, your approvers, and your administrators. So the first one, the submitter, that's probably half of you. That's those of you who every month you go in, select your appropriate invoices, and you submit those invoices for approval. So you send them in for the month. Somebody else goes in and reviews them and makes sure they're right. And then they'll either approve or reject them, and then you can continue on with the payment process. So if you're that original person who is submitting those invoices initially, you're what I call the submitter. And for you, you're going to have access to these first two nodes. The first one, Workflow-AP Invoice, this is going to give you access to notifications. So that way, anytime one of your invoices have been approved or they've been rejected or placed on hold or any kind of action has been taken on them, you can be notified of that. So that way you're in the know and you know exactly what's going on with the invoices that you've submitted. I love the notifications feature and I suggest that to everyone because it really does make life easier. So for those of you who are submitters, this little node here will give you access to those notifications. And we'll look at those in more detail in just a bit too. The second node you'll have here is the invoice submittal. And this is what allows you to check the box and actually submit those invoices to that workflow process every month. So you'll need these first two boxes here for your access. And again, just to repeat, this is something your administrator will control. I'm just walking you through this so that way you understand kind of what these pieces are and how it affects you. Now, the second type of user is the approver. So once the submitter sends in those invoices every month, the approver gets notified. They go in and look at the information and make sure it's all correct. And then they'll either approve, reject, or hold the invoices. So for the approvers, you are also going to have these first two boxes here. Again, the workflow AP invoice, that'll give you access to those same notifications. And then invoice submittal is what gives you the ability to check off whether you want to approve, reject, or hold the invoices whenever they're sent to you. And then the third type of user is your administrator, and they're the person who is controlling these security settings. They're the person setting up your actual workflow configurations, turning on and off workflow and client profile. The person doing all the behind the scenes stuff, that's going to be your administrator. So for them, they could have all three boxes selected here. Technically, you don't have to have invoice submittal if that person is not planning on submitting or approving any invoices. But typically, I see the administrators have all three boxes here. And what this third one controls is it just gives the user access to the area, the workflow area and client profile that we looked at just a moment ago. And it also gives them access to the workflow administration screen here, which is where we will set up and configure the workflows. So those are your three different workflow settings for each of the users. And again, this will vary depending on the person and the role that they play in the workflow. But you set that up within the system class. I'm going to jump back to do not wish to save. Thank you. We're going to jump back to the users tab and I'll select myself just as the reference here. There I am. All right. So here in the users list, this is really where you're controlling, okay, of all of these people, who exactly is going to be approving our invoices? And you need to designate who these people are going to be. So if I'm going to be an approver in your system. Every month, I'm going to review invoices and either approve or reject them. So to designate me as an approver, first of all, I'll need a system class that gives me access to those features like we just talked about. But more importantly, down here at the bottom, I need to establish an AP approvers limit, which means I would have the ability to approve any given invoice up to X number of dollars. So maybe I'm the low man on the totem pole and I can't approve anything over $1,000. So that's going to be my threshold that I limit or that I enter here. So if I enter $1,000 in this limit box, that means that any invoice sent to me within $1,000 range, I'm able to approve that. And it would not need to escalate up to any other approvers or anyone else. But if an invoice ever comes to me outside of $1,000, so let's say it's for $5,000 now, I don't have the authority any longer to approve that invoice. So once I review it and I click approve, it's then going to move up to someone else above me for them to review and approve beyond me. So this limit here is just controlling how much or what your threshold is as far as your approval limit. And again, this is on an invoice by invoice basis. So it's not, I select 10 different invoices, the collective total. That's not how it works. It is an individual invoice amount. So if you have a single invoice for a lease and it includes your rent, your CAM, your water, all these different charges on it, As long as the invoice total falls within your limit, you're fine. So it is the collective invoice amount and not just individual charges on the invoice. One other thing about the approvers is going back to my example from a moment ago where we had a $5,000 limit or a $5,000 invoice. Well, that's above my limit here. However, when that invoice is submitted, it's still going to come to me first because I am deemed as my first approver. I'm the first line of defense, if you want to think of it that way. So if an invoice is outside of my limit, it is still going to come to me first for approval. And then once I approve it, then it would escalate to the next person in line, whether that's my manager or whoever else is above me in the workflow. So just because an invoice is above my limit doesn't mean that I'm not going to see it. It just means that it's going to require an additional approval beyond mine. So when you're establishing your first approvers, you do want to kind of keep that in mind just because it's not going to skip over them and go to the next person. They're still going to see those invoices and have to approve them. So you want to be sure that you're choosing who you desire as your first approver. All right, so last little bit of setup before we actually go into AP Manager and look at the invoices is we're going to go to my account. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Christina. Sorry, a question on that one, on the last topic. If I have multiple approvers, can that second or third approver approve or override without the first or second person approving it, or does it have to go in order for it to be approved?
Yes and no. There's kind of a an answer for both sides of that argument. Um, if each of those approvers has an established limit here, then yes, it has to go in order according to how they're listed in the setup. So it would go first approver, second, then third, and so on. However, if each of those users are administrators, then anyone could go in at any time and approve or reject those invoices. So administrators kind of have a workaround there. They have the ultimate say on these invoices so that if something was submitted to you, but you were out of office and I wanted to go in and approve it for you, if I'm the administrator, I could do that.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and that'll probably make more sense once we look at the setup screen. So if I go to my account and workflow administration, we'll see how these are actually set up. All right, so this is where your workflows are configured. So where you're establishing who that property manager is going to be, who your approvers would be for those invoices. You're assigning those things here. Now your existing workflows are in this list. So if I wanted to look at one or edit one, I could choose that here. Or I could click new and then just start creating my new workflow. So the workflow name, you guys have your own naming convention here that tells you, what's what. So I'm sure that these, mean something to you. But the workflow name just helps you to identify what the workflow is. The workflow level.
Hi, Christina. I do want to spend some time here on this section just to
Okay.
give you a heads up. So our group number one is not automatically updated within AMT. We're still working on that. Meaning the name, how the group, there's group one, group two, group three. So group one is not updated. Yeah, that property manager. This is not updated, right? So, and I know you guys use this as a default, the group one. So we were unable to set it up to the individual property manager. So what we did was, if you go back to the workflow admin page, here, the workflow name. So we name the Amy Lee is actually the PM, the property manager that's testing this. But instead of a group, we assigned invoices for the workflow type. So I don't know if that changes anything on your end, but if you click on Amy Lee, very first one, she is not under the workflow type group, but instead it's under
Oh,
group workflow type invoice.
is that how all of these are here?
No, it's just Amy and Nancy. You'll see Nancy, because we were working with I forgot her name. She was prior
Alicia?
to
Alicia,
yeah,
right?
with Alicia. She was the one
Okay.
helping us set it up, and she said, unless you guys um, change or update the property managers, every day, similar to what we do with our regions, then we won't be able to use the group because group one, it's not accurate, and so we have individuals who are no longer active in that group list.
Okay, I gotcha.
So that is, yeah, so that is why Amy is under workflow type invoice.
So just to be sure that I'm on the same page here, these property managers, hold on, let me open a record to look at. I'm just gonna go to Alfred here, pick one. All right, so this property manager field that we see here, you're saying this is not necessarily accurate for all your different leases and locations.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
Correct.
hey, Jorge. Let me just, Christina.
Yeah.
I did talk to Dan Simone. He's working with TAF,
Hmm.
where we can fix the tie in a feed once a month. Hopefully that will solve the issue going forward. But right now they're working on it.
Okay, so ideally, if you guys get that settled, then these will be updated automatically every month.
Yes.
Okay, that would be great. um, but in the meantime, since they're not automatically updating, that's why you're doing these workflow type of invoice like this, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that changes things a little, but we can work with it. um, well, for the sake of everyone, I'm going to explain both types and
Yeah.
then,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
yeah, and then we'll kind of talk about what you're currently doing versus hopefully how it will look in the future. So to clear things up for the rest of you, in case you're not as familiar with the workflow process, the workflow type here that we're referring to, there's two options. You have invoice and you have group. Typically, group is what's most common here because if I select this, notice we have this new field here to the right called group. And here's where I would see all those different property managers. So all the property managers that you see listed here. And there's additional pages, but which screen was I on? Here we go. So here I would ideally select Amy Lee as my property manager for this particular workflow because that's the one that I'm creating here. So what that would do if I selected her name in this group is any leases or locations that have Amy assigned to them as their property manager. So like this one here we're looking at happens to be Alfred, but for any of them that have this field populated as Amy, the invoices associated to those leases would then go through her assigned workflow. So any invoices submitted for the month, they go to the Amy's workflow, and then she or Chi would be the one to approve those invoices. So by setting up a group workflow in that way, it saves you guys from having to assign a workflow to each individual invoice every single month, because I'm sure that is an exhausting process for you. Because the alternative here from group is invoice, which is what you currently have set up for this one. And so what that means is it's no longer assigning it at that group level, and you would be using this for each individual invoice. So every month, if I go into AP Manager and select my invoices for, let's say, August to submit, I'm going to have to assign Amy's name to each one of them as the workflow before I submit it. Because if I were to submit it without that, they're not going to know where to go for approval. So the invoice option here is meant to be assigned on an invoice by invoice basis. And really the purpose of this type is more for your manual invoices, the one-offs that you're rarely doing. So like if you had a random fee come up one month, or you had an adjustment to a charge, and so you need to create a manual invoice for that. Instead of submitting that through your typical group workflows, you could assign an individual invoice one, and then that manual invoice would go through a different set of approvers for approval. So that's what.
So Christina, sorry,
Mhm.
Christina, on that note, so just to give you understanding, so the monthly invoices that we pay our landlords that are recurring charges, those are not approved by the property manager. Those are processed and approved by me by the on lease accounting side. So the approvals that we're getting from the property managers are those, adjustments, or, like a one-time fee, or a utility invoice, something that is not a recurring charge.
Okay, okay. Um,
Sorry, George. I mean, to
Yeah.
clarify on that one, I'm assuming that your team is only processing it if the amounts are the same, but if there's a change to it, then you guys would also forward that to us, right?
Yeah, yeah. After the initial, approval for monthly rent, yeah, we go ahead and pay going forward. If there's a discrepancy, then it gets triggered to be approved by the property manager. But yeah,
Okay.
that's so it's not like, we have over 2,000 locations, and so we automatically process the rent payments each month. So if it's something that's not part of the recurring, then it gets approved by the property manager as a one-off.
so for your recurring ones, how are you setting those up here? Is this your monthly rent configurations?
Yeah, so that's what is we were planning to do. We were gonna do a monthly rent for each region, for each group.
Okay, I've got you.
So yeah, so it'll make more sense when you get into our AP module and you
Mm-hmm.
see the waiting for approval and approved and waiting for and ready for payment. It'll make more sense when we get to that part. But I did want to point that out, that the property managers are approving invoices that are, not a fixed amount or not a recurring amount.
Yes, that is helpful. I'm glad that you clarified that. Thank you. Um, so for all of your recurring monthly payments, you're creating a workflow here, a group workflow for each one of the property managers, but you and looks like Daphne are the ones to approve all of those. And then anything outside
Correct.
of that, you would assign like the individual ones like Amy or Nancy or whoever, and those would go through a separate workflow, correct?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. All right. I'm on the same page now. Um, all right. Well, hopefully the rest of you followed that as well, because that's going to be your practice now. So the group workflow here, again, that's going to be your recurring invoices every month. So the rent and things that you're paying repeatedly. And then anything outside of that, like your adjustments or recs or anything, those would go through an invoice workflow of which they would assign different approvers for. So just for a little bit of perspective here, because someone, I believe maybe it was Kathy, asked this question earlier about the approvers and kind of the ordering of events and things. So with this one as the example, currently we have Daphne as the first approver and then the second approver with the limit of $100,000. So if we had an invoice submitted for, let's say $75,000 now, kind of falls between the two of them, it's still going to go to Daphne first for approval, even though it falls outside of her limit, because again, she's technically the first approver here. She's the first one listed in line. So it's going to go to her for review. And then once she's reviewed it, then it goes to the next approver or whoever's listed next in line in this workflow configuration. Now, that's because these two users here have a limit set up, which was done in security where we were just a moment ago. But if they were administrators, let's see, I think this one had one like that. Yep. Okay, so on this one, it looks like Amy and she are both workflow administrators in your database. And I know that because there's no limit listed here, which means they basically have the ability to approve any invoice regardless of the limit. Now, in our previous example, this one here.
Sorry. Any invoice within that was assigned to them, correct?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Within their workflow, correct.
Okay.
So this one here, the invoices would go in order according to the dollar limits. So the invoice would go, to Daphne for anything within $50,000, and then anything above that would escalate on. But for this one, where they are administrators, any invoices submitted to them for approval, either of them could log in at any point in time and either approve or reject those invoices. So if Chi was waiting around and Amy dropped the ball, she wasn't approving these invoices and he's in a rush, then he doesn't have to wait for her to go in and do it. He can go in and do it himself because he is the administrator in this workflow here. So does that make sense, or do you have any other questions about the configuration screen?
I do have a question. Sorry, this is
Okay.
Kathy again. So, this whole entire workflow process, right? So we've got our accounting team, George and Daphne, and they're assigning things to Amy. And let's say that, Amy has like 50 invoices. And so she's like, hey, Kathy, I need help. The fact that George and Daphne assigned it to Amy, would Amy then be able to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to take half of these and now assign it to Kathy because she needs help?
Let me think about this. If Kathy had her own separate workflow, or if you were, okay, let me back up a second. In your scenario, Kathy, you're not originally an approver in that workflow, correct?
Correct.
So it's just Amy and Chi. Amy gets overwhelmed and she comes to you for help.
Right.
Okay. If you had a different workflow configuration, so if, how Nancy has hers down here, if you also had an invoice workflow configuration, then Amy would be able to assign the invoices to you, and then they would move into your queue so that you could go in and approve them. But there's no way for her to like share her queue with you necessarily. She would have to reassign the invoices a different workflow.
So when Amy is in the waiting in the review section, she basically just gonna change the workflow from Amy to Kathy.
Correct.
And then
Yes.
Kathy. Okay.
Yep. There's a drop down called, I think it's
Yeah.
workflow name. And then she would just change it from Amy to Kathy, and that would send it over.
Yeah. So I think this will make more sense, Kathy, if I don't know if Christina, if you I don't want to jump ahead, but if you go into the AP module, you will be able to show how we can change from Amy to Kathy. So I think it will make more sense. But I think that was one of the, we have about 5 questions kind of aligned in line to ask, and that was one of the questions. Can we assign an invoice to a different property manager? And it looks like the answer is yes. Maybe the next question will be, can you do it in bulk? Because right now I think the way we're describing it is you would have to go in, Kathy, and each invoice that you need to review and then change the property manager name or assign it to someone else for each individual invoice. I don't know. Maybe the next question would be, can we do it in bulk?
Right. And also my second part to this, it sounds like Amy would have to be assigning those directly to me, but I would not be able to go in there and change Amy's directly to somebody else, correct?
You would if it depends on your access.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with his answer. Because what she's going to do is assign your workflow to that invoice, which means you as the approver or you as the admin would have the same ability that she had on hers. So you could assign it back to her if you wanted to, or you could give it to somebody else.
Got it.
And yeah, it will make much more sense when we're actually looking at the invoices. But before I go there, does anybody else have any other questions on this screen here?
No, I think one of the questions was how many what's the limit on the workflow consideration on the right side? How many names? And we tried about 7 names and it kept going. So
yeah, as far as I know, you're not restricted here. You can have as many approvers as you would want.
Okay.
As long as they're set up with the right access and security and they have limits or they're administrators, then yes, you're able to put any amount of people here that you would want to be involved in that workflow.
Okay.
All right, so let's look at AP Manager now.
Sorry, Christina. Sorry,
No
can you
problem.
go back? Can you go back to the prior page? Because maybe I was just thinking maybe this would be a solution for a bulk solution. So what happens if, let's say, Amy is on vacation for 3 weeks, right? And instead of doing 60 invoices that she's got pending approval, can we add, let's say, Kathy to this list and then remove her, or and without having to assign the workflow name to somebody else?
Yes. You wouldn't necessarily have to remove Amy. What she could do is go to my account and my profile. I'm going to open this in a new tab here so we don't lose this screen. Oh, I must not have it with my access. But typically on this screen down at the very bottom, you'll see out of office dates, and she could populate those with the duration of her vacation. And then during that time frame, any invoices that would typically route to her for approval would bypass her and go straight to the next approver. So in this case, they would go to Chi instead of her.
So my question is kind of aligned with this, and I don't know if this is something that just needs to be set up for every single person. So let's say Amy, right? There's about, I don't know, 11 or 12 property managers. Would it be possible for each property manager, when you look at the workflow configuration, to have all team members in there? That way, every team member has the ability to help out Amy when needed, because it's not always the same person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we can
Okay.
have everybody listed on there. Yeah.
Okay. I think that might be the easiest, George.
Yeah. I mean, we can add them, as requested, and remove them, temporarily. But yeah, I mean, if we just throw everybody in that list, then yeah, I mean, we can kind of, you guys can kind of cross work on or approve the invoices. It's just that the list assigned to Amy may be approved by other individuals.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
One little disclaimer with that too is, let's say that you submit 10 invoices for the month, and now all of a sudden you want to come in here and add Kathy into the workflow. Those 10 invoices that you already submitted, they would either have to go through the full workflow process or be resubmitted for them to pick up Kathy all of a sudden.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's not.
It's moving forward.
Yes, if you do it ahead of time, you're fine. But if those invoices have already been submitted, then it's not going to pick up till the next round. Yeah, so just keep that in mind as you're going through things. If you think that that's kind of a scenario that will likely happen, I would try to do your configurations beforehand. So that way, once you submit all the invoices, you're good to go. And I think, looks like Amy has her hand raised. Do you have a question?
Hi, yes, I do have a question. I was wondering, what if we were to just make a workflow name, like just say recon, and then just had all the property managers under workflow configuration? The reason why I'm suggesting that is because when we do go into the AP approvals, we sort it by regions anyway. We don't sort it by the PMs. I don't know if that would work.
For what you're talking about, would it be for the individual invoices or for recurring ones?
Individual.
Okay. I think that could work. That's really up to you guys on if you feel comfortable creating a workflow like that with everybody involved. But you could do that. Just select the workflow type of invoice, put whoever here in the configuration that you would want, and then when whoever is creating that manual invoice, they would just need to select that recon as the workflow name. And then the first approver listed here, so in this case, Amy, you would be notified, but all the other users would still see those invoices in their queue. So if somebody else wanted to pick it up, they could. It's just, with that many hands in the pot, I think it would be good to communicate with each other like, hey, I've got this one, because otherwise, if you see an invoice one day and then the next it's no longer there, you might be wondering what happened. So as long as you guys are communicating with each other, I think that would be a fine idea.
Got
Yeah,
it.
that's more of an internal discussion. But yeah, that's a good idea. But we could look into it.
With that, sorry, this is Nancy. Question. So then, if all of us are listed in that workflow configuration, since Amy's name is first, or whoever is alphabetically first, would they be the ones who get the notification, or could they choose who's at the top of the list?
Whoever, you would need to make that selection here. So whoever's listed at the top of this box, that's who's going to be notified.
But you can sort that manually.
Yeah, so if I'll just show you one, I won't save it. Let's say I want Adriana to be listed first. I can move her over using this arrow, and then it's going to put her at the bottom of the list, but I could bump her up using these arrows to the right and put them in whatever order I might want. So it's not listed alphabetical or anything of that nature. You can adjust the order.
Got it. Thank you.
But one thing with that is that's only true for users who do not have a limit established here. For anyone with a dollar limit, those do have to be listed in order according to those limits. So like this one here that we were looking at, notice it goes 50 and then 100,000. So anyone with a limit, it does have to go in order, but any of the administrators without a limit, you can put those in whatever order you might want.
And I have a question. So currently, I mean, if you were to add a person to the workflow configuration and 10 invoices were already submitted, that person that you added would not know about the previous 10, correct?
Correct. Yeah, they would
So
not see those.
so let's just say there's a shift in regions, or new regions have been added, or new property managers have been added. Does that mean that if there's a new property manager that's been added, they won't know about the prior invoices if it was assigned previously to Amy?
Um,
So I maybe I can help with this one. I think you will because when you sort, so when you sort it by the region, that individual will be able to see anything that is under that
Okay,
region
got it. So
because
we
it's not.
just need to use a different sorting process.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so keep in mind we're not using group one, which is the property manager, to assign the invoices,
Right.
which is the scenario that you just talked. But because we are creating a group named Amy and we're assigning the invoices to this group, Amy can and you know can sort it by region. It could be multiple regions going into that specific Amy workflow. So it's not assigning the group, you know, by the actual individual. It's just a group that we created. So you should be able to see any region that you filter. Am I right, Christina? Because we are not using the group one to create the workflows.
yes, you're right. One thing that I said earlier that may have been a little bit confusing is in my example where we submitted the 10 invoices and then I added Kathy to the workflow. Kathy would still be able to see those invoices in AP. She just wouldn't have the ability to approve them at that point. She would have to either they would have to be resubmitted or she'd wait till the next time that they came through. But any of you at any point in time should be able to see all the invoices there. It's just whether or not you're able to approve and reject them. That's kind of where the differentiation comes in.
Mm,
Okay.
got it. Then
Yep.
it's probably a side conversation, like an internal procedure that we need to talk about, George.
Yeah, we have to decide on a couple things
Okay.
internally. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any last takers on this screen here before we go into AP? All right, then we're doing it. I'm going to go to accounting and AP manager. And we will look at what we can here. Once it gets into actually submitting invoices, I'll probably log into my training database, but we'll go ahead and look at some examples here first. All right, so within AP Manager, you have 3 tabs. You've got the open invoice list, invoices to be processed, and invoice history. So you're probably all extremely familiar with these 3, but I'm still going to explain them to you because that's my job. So the first one here, the open invoice list, this one is really your holding tank for those future invoices that you're not quite ready to pay yet. So this is going to be anything beyond 2 future periods. So if it's currently July, then August and September should already be in the invoices to be processed. So ideally, the open invoice list would contain anything from October of 2021 and forward. Now, the exception to that is any of your invoices, like you're seeing here, that have exceptions. So it might be payment on hold, missing GL account, missing remit to, missing workflow could be an exception. Just something that's going to be missing that's preventing that invoice from moving forward. So any of your invoices that have exceptions, they're going to be listed here until that exception has been cleared. Once you clear the exception, then you can proceed with submitting those invoices into the workflow process. So this tank here is really all your future invoices. And let me sort your exceptions so I can see some that do not have any. Here we go. Alrighty, so every month or however often you'd go about this process, you guys would come in here and filter on your invoices that you're now ready to pay. You could check the boxes off for them saying we want to pay these particular invoices and then click submit. So here's probably where your internal filtering practices come in. You would filter by not property manager, but whatever it is that you use to find the invoices for the month that you need to be paying, and then check their respective boxes and submit those. Once you check the box and click submit, so let's say I'm going to pay this one single invoice, I click submit here, that's what's going to trigger and kick off that workflow process. So once I submit it, that invoice is out of my hands and it's gone to the approver. They're going to be notified and then they can go in and review that before we proceed with paying it. So open invoice list, here's where you'll come to check those off and submit them every month. Then if we go to invoices to be processed, here we have a lot more going on. You've got about 5 tabs here, waiting for your approval, pending approval from others, rejected, invoices on hold, and ready for payment. So this section here is essentially the entire workflow process. Here's where all the action goes down. Now, waiting for your approval, mine is pretty full here because I have global access. I'm technically an administrator for the day in your system, so I'm able to see all these different invoices. But for those of you who are approvers, you're only going to see invoices here associated to your workflows. So Amy's only going to see her invoices. She's going to see his here. Each of you is going to see your individual invoices associated to your workflow. The exception to that is if you are an administrator like me, then you're going to see everything here because again, you have the ability to approve, reject, or hold any of the invoices if you are an administrator. So from this grid, you do have all the same information that you saw within the open invoice list. So you're able to see all the same data that you would have from the prior section. The only difference really is that you now have these 3 little radio buttons to the left, for one for approve, one for rejecting, and one for placing on hold. And then you've got this new comment box. So for any of the invoices that you are approving, you can just check the little button here, click submit, and then it'll send them over to ready for payment or maybe to a next approver in line if that's necessary. But for the rejections and the holds, when you click those buttons, notice that the comment box here is outlined in red because those 2 are going to require a comment before you submit it. And really the only reason for that is so that way when you reject or when you hold those invoices, the submitter is notified and they know why you took that action. So why did you reject it? Was something wrong? Do they need to correct something? You can add that comment here. And then the same thing for those that are on hold. Why are you placing it on hold? For how long? Just so that way when the submitter is notified, they know why that action was taken on their invoices. So for you approvers out there, you'll come into this little section every month and review all of your different invoices. Whether you use the grid to do that, you could click the hyperlink here to open it up and see the information. But you'll review all the data and then select either approve, reject, or hold, and then submit your invoices. But before I do that, a couple other things to point out. If you're an efficient type of person and you want to do this as quickly as possible, if you want to review all of your invoices first and then submit them all at one time, these boxes at the top are a select all. So you don't have to check each one of these bubbles individually if you don't want to. You could do the top box here and it'll select everything for you. Or then, you could come over and then select your rejections and your holds because there's likely going to be less of those than the others. All right. And then another thing from this screen, if we go back to this invoice number here, it's going to open the invoice information screen, which is really showing you the same information, just in a different format. But here is where you have the ability to select the workflow. So in this case, going back to our example, if I'm Amy and I'm overwhelmed and need help, I can say, okay, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to give it to Nancy and then she can approve it. So here's where you could reassign that workflow as we were talking about earlier. And then once you make that selection, obviously click Save at the top, and then it should notify the other users in that workflow. Okay, discard my changes there. All right, so waiting for your approval, those are invoices that are waiting on you to approve them. But we also have pending approval from others. And these are invoices that have been submitted, but they're not actually in my workflow. They're not waiting on me. So if I were to have approved one of those invoices, but let's say I only had a limit of $5,000 and my invoice was for $20,000, then once I approved it, I would now see that invoice listed here in the pending approval from others. And that would tell me that, after I approved it, it's now gone on to someone else for them to review before we're actually paying that invoice. So this is really just for your reference, so you can see what else is in the workflow process, what's still hanging out there and not being paid just yet. Rejected tab. So any of your invoices that have been rejected, you'll find here. And keep in mind, with the rejections and the ones placed on hold, you will only see invoices within your associated workflow. So if, let's say that Amy rejected 10 different invoices, but I'm only seeing 2 here, then those other 8 were probably submitted by somebody else. So I'm only going to see invoices that I submitted and that were rejected. So here in this tab, we do have this first column, which is new. It's the comment column. So when the approver actually rejected those invoices, here's what they told me about it. I can see who it was that rejected it. So if I had any questions, I know who to go back to and ask. And then all the other information is the same. Now notice here, my resubmit box is grayed out and I'm not able to select that. And that is pretty standard. You'll see that. All that means is that you've yet to change these invoices, which would then allow you to resubmit them. So right now they're the exact same, in the exact same state that they were when they were rejected. So I would need to come in here and open one up. And let's say this one had the wrong vendor. I don't know. Then I could change my payee or my vendor here and save it. And then once I saved, then this box would become enabled and I could check it and click resubmit, which would send it back through that workflow process. So once I click resubmit, it would move from rejected back into pending approval from others, most likely. And I will do all of these actions once I log into my database. I just don't want to be submitting y'all's invoices. Okay, invoices on hold, the exact same thing. So you'll see invoices here that you have submitted that your approver has then placed on hold. So you can view all the information, the comments, it'll tell you who placed it on hold, and then you can resubmit them the same way. So check the box, resubmit, and it'll send it back through that workflow process. All right, and then our last tab here is the ready for payment. So once you've made it here, you've got the green light and you can proceed with actually paying those invoices out of AMT. So once your invoices have been through all rounds of approval, then it moves into the ready for payment tab. So that's when you can come in and say, okay, we're now ready to pay these 3 invoices. So I'll go ahead and check their boxes. Now that I've selected them, I can click Create Payment Batch and then proceed with my information as you would typically. So the Ready for Payment tab here, it functions the exact same as whether you have workflow on or off. The only difference is how the invoices get into this container. with AP invoice workflow enabled, it just means your invoices have to be approved before you'll see them here and ready for payment. All right, and then your last section here is the invoice history. So once you've actually paid those invoices and created the payment batch, it's going to move those invoices to here, which tells you they've been paid, they're historical at this point, and then you could come here to reference the information should you need to. All right, so two other things that I want to look at real quick with while we're in your database before I switch over to mine. Actually, I lied. There's three things. First of all, if I go under AP dashboard to add invoice, I'm not going to upload one for this example, but here's where you would come to do those one-off invoices, whether it's a reconciliation or an adjustment, a random fee, those random manual invoices as opposed to your recurring rents and all the repeated charges. So here's where you come to create those. You would fill out the information as you typically would. And then here you have the workflow field where you could designate, okay, now that I've created this invoice, who do I want it to go to for approval? So here's where you could select Amy or Kathy or Nancy or whoever it is, whatever workflow you want this particular invoice to go through. You would just assign that here. But once you fill out all your information and click save, it's going to give you a pop-up and ask you, okay, do you want to submit this invoice for workflow or do you want it to hang out for a bit? Not exactly in those words, but pretty much. So if you were to click yes, you do want to submit this invoice for workflow approval, then it's going to automatically shift it over into the invoices to be processed and it'll start that workflow process. If you click no on that pop-up, then it's going to place it in this first container here, open invoice list, and it's going to remain there until someone comes in and checks the box and actually submits it to the workflow process. So again, just to recap that, when you save a manual invoice, you can either say yes, you want to submit it, and it'll send it here to invoices to be processed, or no, you do not want to submit it, and it'll place it here in the open invoice list until someone decides to go and submit it later.
So, sorry, we do have a question on this one, and this one's more of the accounting side, so the lease accounting side. So that's exactly how we submit the invoices and assign them to a property manager using the invoice workflow. So if we need something that needs approved, we submit yes, and then the property manager will get notification and they would need to go in and approve it. If we don't want the invoice to be approved, you said it goes into the open invoice list and then it will need to be moved into the invoices to be processed. Correct?
So the invoice is going to be approved one way or another. It's just whether you want to do it now versus later.
Okay.
So if you click yes on that pop-up, it's going to go ahead and start that process and move it over here. If you click no, then it's just going to remain here until someone comes in and checks the box and clicks submit, and then it'll move it over to invoices to be processed and do the exact same thing. So it's not going to jump straight to ready for payment. It's still going to come into waiting or pending approval and have to go through at least one approver before it goes over into ready for payment.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions on the manual invoices while we're talking about them? Or any of it? It doesn't have to be manual invoices. All right, so then two other things I want to show you in here. If you look over in this left-hand section under AP reports, you do have two specific workflow reports to use. You have the AP invoice approval status report and then the AP invoice approval history report. Now you can set filters on these if you wanted to see invoices from a certain state or for a certain property manager, whatever it is you're looking for. You might want to run it wide open. It's up to you. Since you have like a billion leases, I am going to set a filter here. We'll go with Amy since she seems to be pretty involved. So I set Amy as my property manager, which means I'm now going to run this report for any leases or invoices associated to her. And we want to run this for, I'm just going to do the current period. So I'm going to say 7/1/2021 to 7/31/2021 and generate report. I'll do PDF. And then this one here, it's going to show us a list of all the invoices that have yet to be paid and what their current status is. So we can see here, this is really small. Let me zoom in for you. It does remind me of the period in which I filtered on here. And then we can see the invoice number, the date associated to that invoice, and that should be pulling directly from the AP Manager grid. You can see the invoice amount, its current status, and then who it's currently assigned to. So for these, I can see that they're pending approval, so they have yet to be approved. These here have been approved and paid. Let's see if we can find any others here. Nope. So job well done. You guys have done most of your July invoices. But you might see on hold, you might see rejected here. The status column is really meant to help you determine which of the grids in the AP dashboard that invoice falls into. So is it in the open invoice list? Is it waiting for approval, rejected, on hold, invoice history? It's meant to help you locate those invoices and then determine who it's currently assigned to. So that was
just a quick note on that. Just
Uh-huh.
a quick note on that, Christina. That report you just ran also includes the monthly invoices, recurring invoices that were not approved by her, but we processed. The lease accounting team
Yes.
processed. Yeah.
Because, and I could see where that would be confusing, but it's because of the filter. I chose her
Yeah.
as the property manager, and that's not the workflow property manager. It's the actual
Group
property
one.
manager field here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any leases, any locations that have her assigned as the property manager, they're going to be included in that report, regardless of if they went through her workflow or not.
Yeah, and this will be when we start updating this every month, then there would be a more accurate list. Right now, it's because it's not updated. We don't have an updated group one list.
Yes. So you might want to use different filters here to
Yeah.
make it more accurate to the workflows.
Correct.
Yep.
Got
Thank
it.
you for clarifying that. Okay, I got a lot of tabs open here. Let me close out of a few. All right, so that was the approval status report. You also have the approval history report, which is really similar, but it's going to show you an individual invoice and the entire process that it went through. So was it approved? Was it rejected? And then resubmitted? It'll kind of walk you through the entire history of that invoice. So I hope this doesn't confuse you. I'm just going to choose her again as the property manager, just to try to slim down our report. And then I'll run it again for the current period. And you can obviously customize these dates to be anything that you may want, but we're going to run it based on July and say generate report.
Yeah, when we run these reports currently, we're using group 3, which is the regions.
Okay, I'm sorry, I should have done that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Alrighty, so here's your history one. Again, it is breaking it down invoice by invoice. So up top here, we've got invoice 200-863. You can see the invoice amount and the dates, kind of a lot of the same information that you see within the grid in AP Manager. You can see what workflow it went through. So this one was part of monthly rent 3. So this is one of the recurring invoices. And then down here below, you can see the action by, the action taken, the date and when it was taken, who submitted it, and then the submission date. And if there were any notes associated, you could see those here too. So I can see for this one, it was submitted and then submitted again. Okay, so Brianna, it looks like created it maybe. Sophie submitted it in June of 2021, then it was approved, and then it was ultimately paid at the end of June. So let's see if we can find a different one here. Looks like that's how most of yours have gone, which is good. Not a lot of rejections and resubmittals.
Yeah, because these are the monthly the monthly rent payments.
Yeah. Yes, that's how most of them are. I won't scroll through all 36 pages, but you can just use this report to kind of, I think of it similar to like an audit trail. If you want to see the whole process of beginning to end, what an invoice went through, then you could use this for reference. Another similar concept, if I go back to the AP dashboard and invoices to be processed, I'm going to use one in the ready for payment. I'm going to click one of these invoice numbers, and I should have showed you this when we were in here earlier, but I forgot. But on each of these invoices down here at the bottom, you do have a workflow tab, and it'll give you a same sort of audit trail. So you can see when it was created, who submitted it, who approved or rejected it, or any of that. It'll give you their name, their date, and then the action taken. So that you can see on any of the invoices within the grid itself, as opposed to running the report.
And I believe Sophie has her hand raised.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I minimized my.
Hi, Christina. It's okay. This is Sophie. My question is, for example, we have like 20 rats need approval, but about 20, among the 20, I have 2 or 3 ASAP need approval ASAP. Is there any way to kind of like indicate those 3 rats are important and need PM's approval ASAP? Is there any way to show that urgency? Like a red flag or something like that. So they got the notification, hey, we need to work on that priority, treat it as a priority.
Let me think about this. Are you, okay, in this process, are you the submitter or the approver?
I'm
Or
the
both?
submitter.
You're the submitter. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This might be something you want to talk about amongst yourselves, but as you're creating those invoices, so if I go to add invoice here, you could come up with some sort of standard as to how you want to signify this, but you could enter a description here like urgent, or you could use the invoice number and place like a star and then the number itself, so that way you know that those are more top priority. But there's no way to like flag or highlight certain ones other than adding notes to them or using the invoice number.
Okay.
So kind of up to you guys on if you would feel comfortable doing that or not.
So it's just a short note, right? Like put on the description. There is
Yes.
no other like button or feature that indicating, hey, this is urgent, something like that.
Not to my knowledge, no. I don't believe so.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Christina, the text within the description up in the top, the notes section, is that included in the email notification?
I don't remember, but I have an email that I can refer to and see. So one moment. Let's see here. Okay, I'm opening it up now. 1 second. Okay, so here is an example of what one looks like. And this is from my test database, so it's not going to be your accurate data. But you'll see the vendor, the invoice number, the amount. There is, well, this is one for, I tell you what, when I go into my practice database, I will create a manual invoice and add a description, and we'll see if it comes through or not, because I honestly can't remember if that's what's pulled into this field or not.
Okay, no problem.
But this is what one of those emails would look like. So this is to inform you, you have invoices ready for your approval, and then you can view all this information up front.
I
And
guess
that
what
is,
I was trying to get to is maybe if it's possible, you guys can add that field, so then they know the approver will know, okay, this is an urgent one, instead of having to go in an AMT and identifying the urgency. The email notification will say, hey, you have 5 invoices to approve, but 2 of these are urgent.
yeah, I do like that idea. We will test it in just a moment and
Okay.
then go from there.
Okay.
Okay, I see other hands
Sorry.
raised.
On the
Yeah, go
flip
ahead.
side, though, I know Sophie said, okay, this is urgent and needs our approval from the property management side, but on the reverse side, if there's a payment that the property managers need and we want to red flag it as urgent, if you could also look into that.
So
Please.
you would need to flag it before she submits it for approval. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's like, okay,
No,
this
it's basically
go
pay it,
ahead. Sorry.
pay it as soon as possible. Yeah, for that one, Kathy, because AMT transfers the invoices every day at noon, it would need to be more. Yeah, so I get it. So what Kathy's saying, if I approve something and I want it to be paid today, within the next couple of hours, can the AP, the lease accounting, be notified to, oh yeah, I need to release this invoice and get it paid today.
I gotcha. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I have a suggestion. Whether or not you want to do it, I don't know. Actually, let me go back to batch history. So let's say, Kathy, you go ahead, pay invoices. You created that payment batch, and now it's here in the batch history. So AMT automatically picks these up every day at our 3 p.m., your noon, and transfers them over to your system. If you needed it prior to that, you could manually export that file and import it back into your system, but then it would not be picked up in that automated process at noon by AMT. So, which at that point you wouldn't need it to be, because then it would be duplicated. But that is an option, whether or not you feel comfortable manually exporting and then importing into your ERP system. But that is one way that you could do that.
No, but we do have that separation where the the approver does not submit these, right? So it would be the lease accounting side to have to submit this. But the question is there a notification that the lease accounting can get to let them know, hey, this is an invoice that needs to be paid as soon as possible?
I see.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, because we don't get a notification. I mean, we do get a notification. So very similar to the PM, they get a notification saying, hey, these 5 invoices have been submitted for your approval. Once they submit that, Lisa County will get a notification. Is that correct?
yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
If they're
and then
involved in the workflow.
yeah, so similar. It can there be a description field or some comment field within the notification to identify, hey, this is an urgent payment that needs to be paid today or as soon as possible.
So for that one, in that situation, when they click approve here and they send those invoices over to the lease accounting, they can enter a comment here saying this one's super urgent or whatever, and you will see that in the notification. I know these come through. I just wasn't
Okay.
sure about the description on the manual ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that, I guess, Kathy, to answer your question, so we do get, if you put urgent or pay ASAP or whatever on the comment section, then we would get that notification when it gets approved.
Yeah,
Got
you
it.
should
Thank
see
you.
it here and then also within the email.
Yeah, I guess the idea is that we don't have to go in an AMT and then look for something that's urgent, meaning,
Right.
and then you just get the notification, hey, this is urgent.
Mm-hmm. I see another hand raised. Nope, wasn't an accident.
No, it was, yeah, it's me. Hi, Christina.
Okay.
I'm on a Jorge's team and I have a comment. I know in that little comment box section, when we get the email notification that something's been approved or rejected, I have seen in before that their comment will show up in the email, but I don't think anyone's mentioned today that the notification option isn't properly working, I think. Because I've gotten some approvals from the property managers and I received no notification that it's
Oh,
been
really?
approved. Yeah, I used to get the notifications, but I haven't seen one in a while. So I don't know if something's changed.
Well, that's news to me. I haven't heard that. We can test it out once I go in my database in a minute. But are you just not getting them all together or just for certain invoices?
So I get notifications for invoices that I approve myself and submit for payment. But if there's changes that someone else is making to an invoice, any of the property managers, I won't get those. I used to, but I haven't gotten them in a few months. It's been like 2 months.
Christina, that's one of the questions that I have listed for before today, but there is some inconsistency in the notifications. Sometimes I randomly get a notification saying, this invoice has been approved, but it's not very consistent. It's not for everything. So I guess if you maybe could walk us through the correct setup, and then if we continue to see this, can we just create a ticket and maybe there's something on the back end or that's preventing some of these notifications, whether some firewall or something?
Yep, we are on the same page. I was just about to go to the notifications. It could also be a firewall thing, but let's look at this first before we kind of rule that as a possibility, because another thing I'm thinking is if you're being notified about certain invoices and not others, it may have something to do with the workflow configuration itself and not necessarily your notification settings. So let's just look at this one piece at a time. I'm going to go to Portfolio Insight and User Events. And from within this screen here, if I go down to the very bottom, you'll see a workflow for AP section, and you have a handful of events here that you can choose to be notified on. So this here, each of you will have to set this up individually for yourself. This is not something global that your administrator can do. So if you want to receive notifications, you'll need to come in here to user events and check these boxes. But these boxes here on the left that I'm selecting, if you click those, that's what's going to give you your on-screen notifications. So what I mean by that is here on your home dashboard in the activities widget, you'll see each of those events listed and how many of those events you have going on currently in AMT. So you'll see how many invoices are awaiting approval, how many have been completed or paid, how many are on hold, been rejected, resubmitted, how many are pending submission. These are just the different things that you can be notified of. So left-hand checkboxes will be your on-screen dashboard notifications. The right-hand boxes, these are for if you want to be emailed as well. So if I'm a submitter, I'm likely going to want to know if my invoices have either been approved, rejected, or placed on hold. And I want to know that immediately. So I'm going to check these boxes here to the right, and that's going to send me an email anytime one of those events occurs. Now these two boxes here, your day of and your immediately options, you have the ability to change these. And really what these are controlling is how often you're being notified. But I would leave them as day of and immediately, because what that's doing is it's notifying you as soon as that event occurs. So as soon as my approver rejects my invoice or as soon as they place it on hold, I'm getting an email about it. I don't have to wait a week to find out. So left-hand boxes are dashboard notifications. Right-hand boxes are the emails. And then these two here leave to day of and immediately.
Yeah, that's currently how we have we suggested to have the setup for everybody. And I think
Okay.
Daphne has her hand raised right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. How is the screen different from when we go from the widget? Is this taking me to the same place?
Yes, it'll take you to the same place. I just prefer to go through the menu, but you can go either way with it.
Oh, so so this is the same place. Okay, yeah, that was
Yep.
my
So
question.
you're
Thank
talking about
you.
this gear right here, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yep, that'll take you to the exact same screen.
Okay,
I
yeah,
don't
because
know
I
why.
usually go from the other side, but it's good to know I can get there from a different place. So thank you.
Either one will work. I don't know why I just typically go that way, but you can do either one of them. So let me refresh here. All right, so I just saved my notification setup. So I'm seeing all of these here, and I can see how many invoices apply to each of these categories. And so now what I can do is click either of the hyperlinks, either the total or the description, and it'll take me to that section of AP. So if I click this one, it'll take me to that rejected tab, or this one will take me to the invoice history. So I lost the name of it there for a second. So these will take you to the respective tab in AP Manager, just kind of as a shortcut. So I'll show you, I'll click the rejections. and it takes me right to the rejected tab, and I should see all those invoices, all 2 of them that it notified me about. So again, each user will need to set that up for themselves if they want to be notified. All right, so let me quickly log into my training database so we can do a little bit of testing here and see how things go. So one moment. All right. First thing I want to do is we'll do 2 birds, 1 stone here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a manual invoice, and we'll check or test that description field to see if it comes over in our notification. And simultaneously, we will see if I even get the notification, and hopefully I will. But let me just create a random invoice here. This one will do. We'll use 7/27/21. That's today's date as the invoice number. I'm going to send it through my manual workflow, which is the equivalent of your invoice workflows. And I'll say it's $1,000. Whoops. All right. We'll say it's base rent for 1,000. All right, now y'all almost let me slip up and not enter a description. So let me do that before I forget. So let's say testing description, if I could spell it right. 3rd time's a charm. All right, so I created my manual invoice. When I click save, here's that pop-up I was referring to earlier. It's asking, do you want to submit this for workflow approval? So here's where if I click yes, it's going to go ahead and submit it to that workflow into the invoices to be processed. If I click no, then it's going to place it in the open invoice list, and it's going to hang out there until someone decides to go in and submit it at a later date. So we're going to click yes, we want to go ahead and submit this for approval. Invoice created successfully. It tells me it was submitted for approval up top here. So now I know that that invoice is currently going through my AP manual workflow. So let's just go see if we can find it real fast in the AP dashboard. It should be under pending approval from others because I am currently logged in as a submitter user. I'm not an approver. There it is right there for $1,000. And if I open it up here, oh, wrong place. There's my description, but it didn't show in any columns here to the left. So let me check my email now and see if I was notified. I was, so that's good news. I'll show it to you. All right, so here's the notification I just received as the approver now. So sorry, I'm playing both roles, the submitter and the approver. But my approver user just got notified saying you have a workflow ready for your approval, and here's the information. Now, it did not come through with the comment. So the description theory is a bust. That's not going to work. But you still could use the invoice number as kind of a signifier if this is, a critical invoice that needs to be paid immediately. So if you wanted to put like a star or some sort of symbol in the invoice number field, you would see that come through in the invoice, or I'm sorry, in the email. And you could also see it in this screen here. So just food for thought.
I noticed the comment section in that email notification, but I don't think that there's an option for us to insert a comment in the invoice. Am I wrong?
Not in the manual ones, but I think that's there for your system ones because those do give you the
okay.
option to add a comment.
Got it.
Jorge, I think there is a section, but it's a specific comment box. When you're submitting the manual invoice. So yeah. If you go down, Christina, let me see. See, because there's a few sections for comments, including that one right there where it says notes. I've inputted notes there, and they usually show up to the approver, if I am not mistaken.
In the email notification?
Yes. Yes.
So you sparked my idea. I don't think that's the one we're seeing. I think it's when I click save and it asks me if I want to submit it. There's a comment box there, and I think that might be what's picking up.
I think that's the one. I think
Yeah.
it's the one. Yeah.
Let's try it and see. I'll hurry. We'll use this. Well. Oh, need a workflow. We'll send it to the same one. I know this invoice probably doesn't make sense, but I don't really care what kind of information it has. All right, so now when I click save, this box here, I think that might be what's picking up, but so we don't have to do this again. Let's call this one notes box test. And this one we're going to say comment box test. And I'm going to say yes, we want to submit it for approval. And now this time we'll see what comes through and what doesn't. I think that's the one I just created. Okay, just got my email. Guess what? It worked. So that pop-up is what it ended up picking up. So when you save your manual invoices and it asks you about whether or not you want to submit, you can enter a comment there to say urgent or pay ASAP or whatever you need, and it'll pick up in this comment box here.
Okay, and that's the one with the box that's the very last box.
Yes, when we got that
Okay.
pop-up about
Yeah,
submitting
okay.
the invoice.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. All right, so I learned something new today too. I feel like there was
Daphne, did you
something
have your
else we were
hand
going to
raised?
chat.
Daphne, did you have your hand raised, or was that from the prior time?
I think it was from the prior time. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No problem. All right, was there something else we were going to test here too? I feel like there was, but now I can't think of what it was.
Yeah. So so you submitted the invoice to the approver, correct? And then you got
Yes.
notification as the approver,
Yes.
right? Okay. So now my main question was, me as a submitter, when the approver approves a recon or a manual invoice, me as the submitter does not get the notification.
Okay. So let's
Yeah.
test that
So
then.
yeah.
Okay, I'm logged in as the submitter. Let me check my notifications really fast. Workflow approvals, check, completed. All right, so I have everything selected here. So now I'm going to log out as my submitter and log in as the approver and approve that invoice. So bear with me. Oh, there we go. All right, so I have 2 waiting for my approval. I actually don't, I should have checked beforehand to see what invoice, or I'm sorry, what workflow that invoice was assigned to. But this one here was also submitted by my submitter user, so I can go ahead and approve that one. And it should notify me the exact same way. All right, so we're looking at invoice 311 for Landmark Limited. I'm going to try to remember that. And I'm going to say it was approved. And submit. And it was only for $700, so it should move straight into the ready for payment tab. Let's just confirm. Yep, there it is, approved for payment. So then now let me go to my email and make sure it did come through for me. So there's invoice 311 approved for payment, and this is to my submitter user. So is it well, are you receiving any kinds of emails for approvals, or is it just certain invoices?
Julio, can
I
I
only
add? Go ahead.
for oh sorry. I only get them when I myself submit and approve. So if I submit to someone else to approve after they approve it, I don't get a notification.
I think what also might be the case, Christina, is let's say Julio gives me an invoice and I make a change to it. I delete his old PDF and I upload a new one with my approval stamp and comment. And then when I submit it, I get the notification that it's been approved because I'm resubmitting it and then I approve it and then I get it. Then he doesn't get it. I think that.
Oh, okay. I get what you're saying now. So whenever you make that change, your name is marked in the submitter column as the person who is actually submitting that invoice to the workflow. So you are now the one who's going to be notified when it's been approved or paid. So if, let's say Nancy submits an invoice and then Julio goes in and changes something, then Julio would be the one who was notified once that invoice has been approved. So it's going to notify the last person to have submitted or touched that invoice. It's not going to notify like everybody collectively.
Is there a way so that if Julio originally submitted it and then I make a second edit, then he gets notified also? Because I think what's going to be happening in the future is that when lease accounting first uploads the invoice and then we as property management go and make changes, we will always be more or less making a change, but then they'll never be notified.
I gotcha. Are you, Nancy, are you an approver as well or just a submitter?
Approver.
And Julio, you're both. You're a submitter and an approver.
Correct, but mostly a submitter. I only approve the invoices that don't require our property manager's approval.
So Christina, a little background on our process. So when the submitters, the lease accounting department, or we are the submitters, we submit an invoice that has no notes on it, right? So meaning we submit an invoice for approval from the PM, and then the PM will then take that invoice and put notes on the invoice. You know, whether they put a approval stamp or type in their own notes on there on and they sit, and now they have a new PDF, an updated PDF with the stamp approval or notes. Then that's why they replace the original PDF that was submitted for approval with the new updated PDF. But now they become the submitter and the approver.
Okay, I gotcha.
So you got so the question is, because I believe we tried to add a PDF, like add on documents, and it wasn't letting us keep everything the same. We had to basically, Nancy needed to become a submitter for it to work.
For that, let me just think for just a moment. I don't know of any way around that. I think it's only going to notify the most recent submitter, whoever's name is marked as the submitter for that particular invoice. So I get what you're saying, and I definitely agree that it would be way more helpful if everyone would be notified. So for that, what I might do is submit a enhancement request and ask them to change it to where you could select who would be notified about the particular invoices.
Yeah, because it's going to happen. It's very rare that we submit an invoice and they approve the invoice without any notes or replacing that PDF.
Right. I had never considered that before, but that makes a lot of sense to me. So I would submit that as an enhancement request. I'll go ahead and warn our product team that it's coming, and kind of talk to them about why you would need that, and hopefully maybe they can, adjust the functionality for you. No promises, but they'll at least consider it.
Okay.
All right. Well, I just make sure that I didn't skip anything, but I believe that that's everything from a workflow training perspective that I was going to tell you. So are there any specific scenarios or questions or things you want to cover together in our last little bit of time?
Yeah, let me we kind of gathered a few questions, and then I'll just go through them, and if we've already answered them, then we can move to the next one. But I do
Okay.
have a list of 5, and then after that, then if anyone else has any additional scenarios or questions, then we can cover that. But the first one is with the notifications were not consistent, but I think we figured out why, because Julio will not be notified if Nancy becomes the submitter. So
Mhm.
there's no notification to prior submitters, and then you're going to submit a enhancement request, and then you can follow up with us after that one. Number 2 was, can approved paid invoices be directed to a specific folder under documents? So currently, the property manager group has a specific folder that that directs the PDFs, or they save their files. Exactly what we were just talking about. So the original file submitted from Julio now gets revised by Nancy, and Nancy has a specific folder in AMT that she saves it under. But whenever these invoices are paid, they go under an invoice folder under documents. So can we specify where to save the invoice? And if you want to log in back into the Panda account, I can show you exactly what we're talking about.
Okay. I think, is this what you're talking about right here? So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I believe that that's going to just default to the invoices folder every time. I can ask around to see if they know of a way to change that, but to my knowledge, it's just automatically going to default into that invoices folder for
Yeah, is
whatever
there a
lease is
way?
associated.
We would really want this request, because what's happening is now there's the same file is being saved in 2 different places. By default, when the invoice is paid, it's going to the invoices, and then the PM is also taking that paid invoice, and saving it under a specific folder that they have.
Okay. I would imagine you'll probably still have to keep doing that in the meantime, but that's another enhancement request that you could submit and ask them if there's a way to
change the
designate
default
which.
or
Yes.
designate. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm just thinking about that from a system perspective, and I don't even know where you would get the option to specify that, like choose which folder, because there's never anything that prompts you about that. So I don't know. That's going to be have to be one for the product team to consider.
Okay. So that was number 2. And question number 3 was, as regions change, so as we change our property managers or our regions, what will happen to the invoices that are pending approval? So if we have Northern Cal and Southern Cal, and so now all of a sudden, there's a new region being added to California, so now there's 3 regions. Does it reallocate the approvals, or does it just stay by the initial submitter? So if it was submitted to Southern California, it will stay under Southern California.
Let me log back into your database just to be sure that I'm on the same page with that question. So one moment. All right, so for your regions, would those be recurring or manual invoices?
Manual invoices.
Manual, okay. All right, so let me run this back past you and see if I'm understanding correctly. So if you had invoices for Southern California that you submitted to, I'm just going to say Amy's workflow for the time being. So you submit those invoices to her, and then all of a sudden the region changed, and now they're now considered just part of a general California group. Would you have to reassign their workflow, or would they continue to go through Amy? Is that the question?
Correct.
Okay. They're going to continue to go through Amy's workflow, which I don't. Is there a reason why you would need them to go through a different workflow?
Maybe I could add, so I think for me on the property management side, if there's a regional shift and it was going to Amy previously, but now there's a new region and that region is mine, I would probably be sorting the invoices based on regions.
Okay. Yes, that's helpful. Hmm. I think that's going to have a lot to do with that automated process of them updating those regions and fields every month. Let me just open one of these to be sure. All right, so you're talking about this field right here, number 3. Yes.
Yeah, that's the one that
Yeah.
would be changed. That one changes. It could be, those are updated daily.
So you guys
But
go in and
if,
manually update those.
yeah, the only ones that would be updated monthly according to Chi would be the property manager field, 2 fields above that.
Okay.
But the way the company works is, this HL region right now could all of a sudden, be split into 2 regions, let's say HL East and West or whatnot, or they could completely get rid of that and name it a brand new region. So if it was previously submitted to, let's say, HL region, but HL region no longer exists and it's now renamed as, let's just say Rocky Mountain South, whatever it is, for reporting purposes, will all of the previously submitted HL invoices now be changed to the new region?
I see.
Is that
Yeah,
the
you should.
question, Jorge?
Yeah.
Okay, I got you. Thank you for clarifying that. With this one here, the regions field, you should be totally fine. Whatever you change this to and click save, when you go back into AP Manager and just refresh the grid, it should pick up with that new region automatically, whether it's been submitted previously or you submitted it today, it wouldn't matter. These kinds of fields here, any of these in this widget, they're meant to automatically update instantaneously within the invoices in AP. The only difference is the property manager one, and the reason that that one's different is because that's the one that you used as your workflow grouping. So that one tends to differ a little bit as far as functionality. But any of these other groupings or fields that you may change, you should automatically see that reflected in the invoices. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's also going to require conversation, Kathy, as to how you guys want to address those changes. Will the PM prior that had it prior continue to work on these invoices, or if the region shifts or changes, the new individual or new property manager will take over?
Right, makes sense. And I think that's part of the reason why I was asking earlier with the workflow configuration, is it better to just have certain people's names in there because of these changes that could happen? And so
Yeah.
if we don't have all of them in there and all of a sudden there's a new region, your team sounds like will have to re-upload those invoices naming a new person. So I think I was just thinking more about that. But yeah, sounds like an
Yeah.
internal discussion.
But yeah, I think if we start using the property manager, which is group number 1, um, then we don't have to worry about the changes in the region, because the region will be associated with that property manager.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So if I may, just because it sounds like it's the perfect time to ask this question, Christina, I sent you a message and please let me know if you want to discuss it offline. But to add on to what Jorge was saying about the regions or whatnot, so for the property management side, I follow regions closely. So if I'm handling, HL region, and I want to know exactly what's going on in my region for audit purposes, I want to be able to understand, like, okay, here's all my stores in HL region. You've got store 204. I want to know, okay, we've received 2 invoices that still need to be approved, or maybe we've received 3 invoices altogether and they've all been approved and so nothing is pending. Is there a way to create that kind of reporting based on the fields that are already set up with approval process? I just want to understand like historical data as well as like current invoices that may or may not have been approved yet.
I think, which I mean, you could create a report on your own time if you feel inclined to do so, but I think the existing ones in AP could probably accomplish that. You would just
Okay.
want to play with the filters a little bit so that way you're able to, narrow down what you're actually reporting on. So let me go to one of these for an example. I'm going to use the approval status report here. So if I go to the region filter and we say we now want to see the HL region or whatever it is you may be looking for that day, you can select more than one. But I can click whatever region I need to report on. You can set more than one filter here. So if you wanted to see, leases in that region that have a certain DMA, I'm not really sure what that means, but you could, narrow it down even further if you wanted to. But for the sake of the example, we'll just do region, and then I can enter whatever period that you want to be searching for. So if I want to say the current through, I can do the end of next month as well and generate report. You can choose whatever format you'd like, but I'm going to do PDF.
Yeah, and I think this might have something to do with what Jorge brought up earlier, which is, how certain documents that they input versus we approve may go into different folders. And so if all of our approvals, the property managers, are being saved in, let's say, the reconciliation folder or escrows folder, am I going to be able to incorporate those folders into this status report that you generated so that I can understand, okay, store 204, these two invoices, for the 2019 and 2020 CAM reconciliations have already been approved. And now we're only pending, like the water charges.
Which part of this is just me not fully understanding all of your data and how your database is configured, but are you wanting to see in this report the actual invoice document itself or just the details around it? What I'm getting at here is what data are you actually trying to pull into the report specifically? Because that's going to tell me whether this one would do or whether it's possible in Report Builder.
I don't think I necessarily have to see the invoice detail,
Mm-hmm.
but I need to know whether or not that particular invoice has been approved for payment, like it's been processed, or it's still waiting for approval.
Okay.
And so to give you an example, right, again, if we're talking about store 204, if I'm auditing, if I generate this report, can I say, okay, look, the last 3 reconciliations for this has already been approved. I just need to, work on the water reconciliations and audit that.
I gotcha.
So the lease level filters screen that you have on the right side, I think maybe this is what you were alluding to, is that I can filter based on that, but could we create, I guess, the different fields that are in there, pulling it from certain fields in the documents section that have been uploaded?
This report here, definitely not. I'm thinking, is there like here, let's just go to one of these invoices and you can show me exactly what it is you would like to pull in. Do you have a certain one you want me to look at, or can I select any of these?
You can select any of those.
Okay. This one it is.
So this one right here, and Amy, Nancy, please correct me if I'm wrong, just because I haven't had to do this process, but when our lease accounting team submits this to us, we would then download the PDF version so that we can put our notes and, write our approval on this. We then would upload it back into the system so that our lease accounting team can process the payment. And so I guess when Jorge was asking, which folders do these go into after our team approves it, I think when I'm looking at the store itself, store 934, I don't know based on where it is in the folders whether or not it's been approved or not. And so I don't want to have to click on each invoice to see if it's already been approved. I want to understand the status on each invoice based on a report.
Okay. With that, so I see here that this is a CAM charge, but it has a lot of different line items to it. So were you saying in your report you want to see each of these line items, or does it matter if it's just CAM and it's
No.
been approved?
Right. I just
No.
need to know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I just need to know whether or not that payment type, the
Mhm.
CAM A, has been approved or not. I don't need to know individual line items within that reconciliation.
Okay, so in that case, I do think that this report here could work because it'll tell you the invoice number. Well, yeah, the invoice number, the actual status. You can see waiting approval, rejected, on hold. It'll tell you the status here and then the date and who it's currently assigned to, if anything is still pending. So what
So,
you can do is, go ahead.
sorry, I was gonna say, based on that report that you just showed, it's showing me invoice numbers, but when I'm doing a store audit, I wouldn't be looking at invoice numbers. I would be looking at store numbers.
Right, which
Okay.
is why I was getting at with the filters. So if I just filtered on store 230 or whatever, then I know that all those invoices are associated to that store. Does that make sense? Now, alternatively, to make it a little easier, I believe this exact same report exists in Report Builder, and then you could just add a store number field or lease name or whatever field into the report to identify what those are. So that way you don't have to filter each report, or I'm sorry, filter each lease as you're running that report, because that would take a while.
Yeah, Kathy, if you tell me which fields you want to see, we can create that in
Okay,
Report Builder. Yeah, I think it's
sounds
the
good.
easiest. Maybe, but we can use one of these reports as a starting point.
Okay,
And like Christina said, if we want to include the store number, then we can possibly list the store number, and then you can filter by the store number as well.
yeah, I think I'm more concerned about just region purposes because then if
Yeah,
I'm auditing, if I'm auditing my region, I want to see a quick snapshot. Okay, what do I have and what do I need to do? But
yeah,
there could be times I may have to drill down to a specific store, but
yeah.
I think I was thinking
Because
about it
one
more
of the
versus.
things you have to keep in mind too is that report is giving you a manual, the invoices that are manual, and then the recurring charges too. But you may just not want to. You may just want to focus on the manual invoices,
Right,
like the recons, and I
right.
mean the monthly rent is going to be being paid, but you may want to filter that out as well. So instead
Yeah.
of including the group invoices, you would only include the invoices that are manually inputted.
Yeah, and I think this goes back down to what we were talking about last time, the importance of just having similar naming conventions. It doesn't have to be identical, but at least if we needed to filter based on reconciliations, then I guess the report can do that, right?
Yeah, because the system also identifies it as a system or invoice, and the system usually means it came from the recurring charge type,
Uh-huh.
and then invoice means that it was a manual invoice that was uploaded.
Okay.
Yeah, but this filter here, this one is more. It's more of, well, how do you want to filter out the stores, right? By the property manager, region, venue. But the filters you're talking about, it's more on the fields that are within the AP invoice section. Sorry, Christina, I know you're on this filter here, but I think from what I'm understanding is it's more on the AP invoice filtering. So if you go into the invoices to be processed here, I think this is where the filter is going to be, but it's also going to include invoice history. But here we can sort out, see the manual. Yeah, it's manual or system. So manual meaning it was manually submitted, and system means it came in from a recurring charge. But but we would have to combine this report with the invoice history, because she would want to see what has been paid for this store on a manual process, whether recon or utility, and then what is pending to be paid for this store.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a combination of these two. It's invoices to be processed. So then she gets a clear picture of, okay, this store has paid for these items, but we still need to pay for these items. And I think it's a combination of those two, invoice history and invoices to be processed.
Okay. Yeah, for that, I would probably try to create a report in Report Builder. You should have all these fields as options for that, so you can customize what you do and don't want. And then if you struggle with that, you can obviously submit a ticket and our team can help.
Yeah, I think, and it's something that we can find a starting point, whether it's either invoices to process or invoice. I think invoice history is probably the easiest place to start, and then add on invoices to be processed. So we can work on that offline, Kathy.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I got two more questions. So the last two more. The first one, number 4, is storage capacity. Is that going to be a concern for us with in our client number?
Storage in what way? With documents, invoices, everything?
Yeah, either a quantity of RAM or memory, or the number of invoices uploaded.
Go ahead.
Currently we only have 2 property managers testing this, and we're soon going to be, when we roll it out, we're going to roll it out times 10 or 12 people.
I've never heard of there being like a max as far as storage goes, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I can follow up with Taft or someone from our IT team just to see if that's something that may arise as a problem. But to my knowledge, I don't think so.
Yeah, Christina, I don't think there's the cloud storage cap for us.
Okay, yeah, I don't either, but I will just double check to confirm and let you know whenever I send out the recording.
If Tess says otherwise, I'll talk to him myself, but it's always been unlimited storage for us.
Okay, great.
And the last one, I know we've gone over it. Invoices level approval can PMs request invoices to be approved by another property manager. We went through that where they can actually go in and change the workflow name to somebody else. So yes.
Yeah.
So those are the 5 questions that I know we came up with. I don't know if anyone else from either side has any other questions.
I think I have one more question regarding the number 5 question. So regarding the route, we need to open each individual document and then go to that screen to reroute. We cannot select a bulk package, right?
Correct.
But it sounds like the PM will be the one rerouting. So the PM,
right.
So Kathy won't send you a notification, say, hey, I don't want this invoice, and send it to Nancy. I think Kathy would just go in there and say, okay, this will be for Nancy. Is that correct, Kathy and Nancy?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, just to clarify, because we're rerouting in this workflow, it doesn't reroute it in the property manager section.
No, okay. This is just for an individual invoice.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anybody
that's my
else?
question. Thank you.
Yeah. And keep in mind, so this is also a suggestion that came from Amy, where we say, well, we create a workflow under recon, so all the recons go in there, and all the property managers are approvers for that. That's something that we need to discuss on our end.
All right. Okay. Any other questions?
Nothing from me.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully it helped you out some. I will double check with Taft just to confirm that your storage is unlimited and let you know about that. And then I will also send you this recording later today. It tends to take a little while to download, but you will either get it later this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning. I'll send that to you. But thank you for joining, and I hope you have a good one.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you, everyone.
Bye.